George Entwistle was seen very much as your man. You're obviously very keen that Tony Hall should be here, and were quite instrumental, I guess, in getting him. They're very different characters. How have you come to two such different choices?
Well, George Entwistle and Tony Hall haven't been just my choice. They've been the choice of the BBC Trust, and there are 12 of us. They both had tremendous experience in news and current affairs, and one of the paradoxes of George's difficulties is that he'd been an outstanding editor himself of Newsnight, had dealt with tremendous pressure during the attempts to get him to reveal his sources during the David Kelly tragedy. So he'd had experience in that area, and it's very sad that it was a couple of issues involving Newsnight which triggered this crisis that we've dealt with. They're both, Tony Hall has fantastic experience in news and current affairs. He was, and I think all his colleagues on other channels recognise that, he was an outstanding chief executive of BBC News. He launched things like our online news service, BBC Parliament, 5 Live. He did a tremendous job here. He then went to the Royal Opera House, where he had an equally distinguished career as chief executive, opening the Royal Opera House up to bigger audiences and to younger audiences, while at the same time increasing its resources. And he also, people may know him best recently from chairing the Cultural Olympiad, which went so well last year. So he hit two buttons. First of all, his experience in news and current affairs, and secondly, as a considerable figure in the British cultural world.
You made it quite clear in your opening remarks next door that when you'd approached him first, he thought it might be time for somebody from a younger generation. Has he said to you why he changed his mind and thought it was time for an old hand like him to come back?
Well, first of all, I'm 7 years older, so he seems positively a teenager to me. To be serious, I think he recognised that the BBC, and he wouldn't have put it like this because he's not vain. I think he realised that somebody with his experience and somebody with his commitment to a great national institution could probably do a pretty good job bringing some of that experience and some of that knowledge about the BBC to the job now. So he changed his mind, partly, as I said, because he was no longer responsible for the Cultural Olympiad, but also I think because he recognised that he could make a real contribution, and we're really pleased. And I think the reactions everywhere have demonstrated that it was the right choice.
Everybody talks about the need now for stability here. There has been a really bad feeling for the last few months, if not weeks, crisis people call it, whatever you want to call it. How is he going to bring back that stability? I mean, there was talk at one stage of Newsnight being taken off the air and all this kind of thing. How is he going to inject some sense of the BBC's identity back into it?
Well, the first job is being done by Tim Davie, who's the acting Director General, who's doing a very good and difficult job at the moment, getting things back on an even keel. I think Tony will want, over the coming 2-3 months before he actually starts doing the job 24 hours a day, he'll want to talk to a lot of people and assemble the sort of team around him which he will want and need, because this is one hell of a big job, and it really does need the person who's doing it to have the best and strongest possible team. It's a job for a team, it's not a job simply for one emperor.
And can I ask you finally, but you sounded genuinely cross or perhaps upset about what had happened to George Entwistle and the way in which he's been spoken of and dealt with. Is that how you feel?
Yes, look, I can understand why people feel a sense of crossness, of resentment about the terms on which he left. The fact is that those terms were probably as good or better than any which would have been available had we proceeded to a constructive dismissal or a constructive dismissal with an unfair dismissal attached, when we'd have fetched up paying the same amount or more. What I do feel is that some people who become a bit judgmental about these matters should perhaps be a little careful about it. Of course I can understand why people were cross. I wish people had listened a bit more to the explanations of what had happened, and I certainly don't take any pleasure in watching people dance on the reputation of a good and decent man who unfortunately was overwhelmed by a huge crisis.
You are going to stay though?
Yes. It's my job to try to ensure that the BBC gets back to its best, gets back to the having the sort of reputation it had after the Olympics, when I guess its reputation had never been higher.